Today's networks are changing fast, and employees, devices, and infrastructures are more distributed than ever. Gigamon Threat Insight is a cloud-native, high-velocity network detection and response solution that's purpose-built to enable you to get in front of this transformation. Discover hidden network threats, automate security investigations, and optimize security workflows to stay a step ahead of attackers with Gigamon Threat Insight. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Gigamon. The hybrid workforce is here to stay, and it requires real-time visibility, control, and rapid response of every endpoint, whether it's in the office or home. Tanium offers an endpoint management and security platform built for the most demanding IT environments. Many of the world's largest and most sophisticated organizations, including nearly half of the Fortune 100, rely on Tanium to deliver unmatched endpoint visibility and control. Whether you're preparing for zero trust or protecting your network from supply chain risk, Tanium empowers technology leaders to achieve greater agility, efficiency, and confidence. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Tanium.
Welcome back to RSA Conference 2021, live from Virtual Broadcast Alley. I am your host, Matt Alderman. Joining me for this segment is Mark Ralls. He is the President and Chief Operating Officer at Acunetics by Invicti. Mark, welcome to the show.
Yeah, welcome. Thank you. It's great to see you again. Sorry that we can't get together in person.
I know. We were just reminiscing about the last time we saw each other, which was at RSA Conference 2020 in San Francisco. Hopefully we get back to those soon. We're going to talk about how to prioritize your web app security. We actually did an interview segment with one of your folks. You guys did a report on kind of the web app vulnerability trends from 2019 to 2020. And what we saw was some drop off in focusing on the web app. We saw some increases in some vulnerabilities. So let's start with a little background on the research that you guys did and kind of the results, because it leads into the rest of the conversation about how do we reprioritize web application security.
Yeah, absolutely. So we, every year we create, as part of Acunetics, our web vulnerability report, and we released that this year for the first time as what we're calling the Invicti AppSec Indicator, which will be a bit of a kind of umbrella publication in which we'll publish all of our research as we go throughout the year. A lot of that will come from Acunetics. Some of that will also come from our sister brand, NetSparker, and we're both under that Invicti umbrella. And so we did a report where we updated our annual, kind of view into an analysis of how our customers are leveraging, Acunetics in order to scan and secure their web assets. And what we saw, over the last, over 2020, I was going to say the last 12 months, but now we're in May already. But over 2020, what we saw was, a bit of a fallback in the level of rigor and discipline and focus around, identifying, remediating, and resolving vulnerabilities. And so, whereas normally we've become accustomed over the years to seeing companies kind of get incrementally better year after year after year in creating a more secure, in kind of securing their web app, threat landscape. 2020 was a step back in many ways. And, what we've discovered, somewhat anecdotally and also somewhat, quantitatively in talking to our customers and surveying our customers is that, there was a lot going on in 2020. I mean, we all know that. But what that really meant, for security pros and what they really had to live through is that, pre-NBA shutdown, right, in January, February, back when we were at RSA and into early March, it was somewhat business as usual, and they're going about their business as normal, and then really all of a sudden overnight, it's, hey, every one of our employees is remote, and we got to make sure we secure endpoints, we stand up, VPNs, we improve VPN throughput and access, and a bunch of related activities that fell on top of that. And all of that really pulled focus and resources away from web application security. But the scary thing is that there's one really important group out there that didn't take their focus off web applications, and that is kind of the criminal element and the black hat hacker element globally, who really viewed this as an opportunity to really double down their focus. And so, the threats haven't diminished, the threats, haven't gotten any lower, but yet the vigilance dropped off a little bit, and it dropped off for a lot of good reasons, right? There's no blame or finger pointing in all this, other than to highlight, something that we see as a concern that organizations really need to get back to and get back to focusing around, because all of the evidence points to the fact that the negative elements that are out there and the negative groups that are out there, they didn't lose focus, and they're still focused there. And so that's a bit of the summary of what we found, through the research.
Yeah, and I read the report. I looked at the report. We actually did an interview on the report, like I said, and we saw this beautiful drop over the last 3-4 years, and then it just kind of went. Ooh, just flatlined in a couple places. I think the most interesting was critical vulnerabilities actually ticked up on the web application side, which means the ones that are most likely to do remote code execution or something like that are the ones that are ticking up. A lot of the other ones stayed pretty flat. We made a little bit of progress in certain places, but again, I think it was focus, right? As you mentioned, focus was, I got to get my employees working from home. I got to get VPNs up. But the other trend that happened last year was we accelerated digital transformation. And this is not going away, which means we're putting more stuff in the cloud. We're spinning up new applications in order to support this new work paradigm, this new consumerization paradigm. And so as we're taking the ball off of web apps, we're also throwing a whole bunch of more web apps into the environment. And so you get this disconnect on focus versus what's actually reality and when it comes to application security.
That's right. And that's another area where you see the kind of natural disconnect that happens when everyone's focused on getting their day jobs done. And you've got the engineering team and the developers, who are all now also remote. And the best way for them to continue to move fast, continue to deliver value for their customers, frankly, to deliver new features and new capabilities that are more important when you're in a remote first world, they're moving heavily to public cloud. They're and really shifting the approach of how they deliver applications and deliver value, while at the same time the security team's just trying to keep everybody safe and trying to make sure everyone can access the network. They're not focused on the fact that hey, a whole bunch of things that used to be, within the friendly confines of the network and protected in a certain manner, are no longer protected because they're now out in the cloud. And so, yeah, it definitely creates a lot of catch up for security teams, and not because they fell down on the job. Again, it's they worked kind of harder and more hours than ever before, but they had a lot more tasks on their plate, a lot more things to focus on. And again, the dev teams are moving as fast as they can. And for many companies, it was the difference between survival and failure. They've got to be able to meet their customers where they are. They've got to continue to deliver a lot of value in a much more budget constrained world. So they had no choice but to move to the cloud and to make that acceleration. But it just creates a big challenge for security teams to pick up and catch up to where they are. Again, because the world moved very quickly, and it moved very quickly overnight. What we really saw is, based on some of the analysis that I've read, we may have seen a 2 to 4 quarter acceleration in cloud adoption that essentially occurred in a matter of weeks.
Yeah, and the numbers I hear are closer to 12 months acceleration, almost across the board. I mean, most of the interview discussions we've had, we kind of did a year's worth of leap head in 2020, and I think it's just going to continue, right? It was funny last night, we were having a discussion about, I said this, this was going to start to happen 5 years ago, and here we are 5 years later, and we have this big event, this big catalyst that is actually accelerating to the point where we're making up for some lost ground, and this is only going to continue over the next 3 to 4 to 5 years. So I think it's a very interesting dynamic that we have to be cognizant of.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that's happening is that you've got constituencies within a company who were typically skeptical of putting things out in the cloud or making things publicly available. And what's also happened is in their personal life, they shifted really, really heavily in terms of their own activities, what they were willing to do online, and their own online experience. And so they're getting more comfortable with the fact that, just all of these services are online. That's just the way the world works. And so you had, CFOs, and other senior executives who in the old days would have blocked and said, no, there's no way we can put that in the cloud, who are now have really made a leap in their own understanding of the cloud and the security of the cloud, and are allowing more things to move. Which again, that genie doesn't go back in the bottle.
Nope.
Right. We're moving from a world where you have to justify using the cloud to and I think we've already moved to this world where you really now have to justify why are you not in the cloud.
Yeah, as everybody says, it's the new normal. So my question is, Mark, how do we get people back on track, right? Because we had the lost year. I call it the lost year because this is the best way to describe it. In some respects, we had the lost year. So how do we get teams and organizations to get back on track and really start to bring those vulnerability counts back down and make progress again?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's really two components to this that from my perspective and our perspective. I think one of those is more of a tactical and a technical perspective, and that is you've got to bring and implement best-in-class tooling. You've got to have automation. You've got to be able to discover applications, which by the way is a feature we just launched in Acunetics earlier this year. Application discovery. You've got to be able to robustly scan them. You've got to have great integrations into your ticketing systems, getting things over your developers, showing them, proof of exploit, all things that Acunetics does very, very well, so that you are, able to really close that gap between very accelerated release cycles and remediation. And so that's one element. We can kind of get into that and talk about that. But there's a whole other element, which is around incentives and motivations and making sure that as a security professional, am I doing a good job of educating, my executive suite as to why this isn't a necessary evil, but it's actually a firm requirement of doing business. Mm-hmm. And really there's kind of the other big shoe that dropped from our perspective in 2020. You had all of the disruption as part of COVID, but then you had SolarWinds happen late in the year. And what we've really seen is just a complete sea change in the way enterprises are looking at evaluating their vendors. And so a lot of Acunetics customers are small and medium-sized businesses or mid-market businesses that are selling into larger enterprises, and those larger enterprises are applying a degree of scrutiny that we've frankly never even seen before, as they try to avoid kind of the next supply chain attack. And so a lot of small and medium-sized businesses that have never really thought about consistent, continuous automated web app security, they're now having to do that and prove that as part of the procurement process. And if they're able to show that better than the competing vendors in the space, that can make the difference in which tool is selected, which vendor is selected. And so there's really kind of this two-pronged approach. There's if I'm leading a security team, there's how do I help my team catch up? What tools do they need? What automation do they need? How can I get a force multiplier? Because I'm not, especially in this job market right now, I'm not going to be able to hire everyone I need. And then there's the other hand, which is how do I then justify this and justify the budgets, the expenditure, the focus that we need from the organization. But if it means we can win more deals, which now more than any time in my career, it really does make the difference between who's going to win that deal, you or the next competitor over. Security has so elevated in the eyes of purchasing departments, legal departments, at enterprises, that it really is a chance to differentiate yourself. So it really is. It's how do you manage both aspects of it, of how you get the job done, but then really how do you create that sense of urgency within your company? Yeah,
I mean, security as a competitive advantage is real in this environment. But let's go to the first point, because I think you mentioned a couple things that I think are big challenges for organizations because they're arms around. Asset discovery, right? Website discovery. The ability to understand what is being pushed out from the development teams is always been this really big challenge in the industry. And the first start is, look, I have to discover it. I have to know it's there. Then I have to build some automation around scanning and being able to bring this in. And the point I want to make here is, outside of the discovery piece, the frequency of what we need to be scanning at is completely different. I've spent a lot of time in the vulnerability management days. Mm-hmm. If I could get somebody to scan their entire network monthly or quarterly, we thought that was good. In the application security world, we're talking daily or multiple times a day. And I think it's this frequency that is going to create some challenges for organizations unless they have some good discovery and automation capabilities in place.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And this is one of the things that, for a lot of folks that we talk to who are in leadership positions today, who started their careers when you and I started our careers, it was the annual pen test was kind of the rite of passage, and that's what everyone wanted to see. And that is, that's a concept that really needed to die 10 years ago. It was probably still alive 2 or 3 years ago. It is dead now, dead and buried and gone. I mean, it's the network changes so fast. With containerization, with just the way in which we are, provisioning and deploying applications, there are so many changes that occur and that can occur on a near constant basis. On top of the fact that in order to stay competitive in this world, many of our customers are really fully bought in around continuous delivery, and they, for some of them, daily, doing daily releases and daily builds is kind of old news. And they're like you said, they're moving, really just at the speed of business at this point. And so, the idea of an annual pen test is just laughable, as is the idea of a quarterly or even a monthly. I mean, it really is about that continuous scanning, continuous alerting. There may have been a config change that was pushed yesterday. That something that was not exploitable yesterday is now exploitable today, and there may not have been a release, or there was a release and maybe a config change too, and those things are interacting in a way that's negative and is creating a vulnerability. And so, just always being active, constantly scanning, constantly looking for issues is more important than ever before. And I think the other thing that we're seeing is it's not all about your kind of crown jewel applications, the ones that have the most eyes and focus. It really is about anything that can really kind of submit data into your infrastructure. And a lot of the highest profile breaches we've seen have been really peripheral, forgotten, orphaned, abandoned applications. And this is true both at very large companies and at very small companies. So you really need discovery, because we have yet to encounter a customer who wasn't surprised by the things that came back as part of discovery. Right? It's routine that we're finding 30% more websites or more web applications than they realized existed or were still out there. And so you kind of combine these two facets, and there's no way for a human team to keep up, much less catch up. Right, given the fact that we lost some ground in 2020.
So some recommendations there. I mean, are you literally continuously doing discovery for your corporate networks? I mean, is that the guideline? And then from a scanning perspective, is it no more than daily? I mean, what are we seeing trend-wise? Because like I said, new stuff's coming up all the time. And your point was, also, code change multiple times. What if there's a vulnerability in an open source component that just happened to get released, right? So what are some of those recommendations? Discover continuously and scan at no worse than once a day? I mean, is that what we're seeing now?
That's definitely the way the world is going, and not every company is there or necessarily needs to be there tomorrow, right? Although probably the day after tomorrow, they all need to be there. But no, it's really the way the world going. It's where because of the evolution of threats, and you brought up open source components. It's a remarkably high percentage of applications that ship today with open source components, something like 80+%. And not only do you have to understand the security of that open source component, but you also have to understand that, what did your developers do as they integrated that open source component into your application? And is there some way that even if that open source component is secure, the way in which it's integrated may or may not be secure? And so there's getting to daily scanning. And here's the, some of the conversations that we'll have with our customers, with our prospects are like, wow, like, how do you expect us to be able to do this? And we're like, well, we don't. That's actually not your problem. That's our problem, right? And so that's the beauty of leveraging a tool like Acunetics. Where there is the ability, where you're able to kind of go in and select your frequency of discovery, you select your frequency of scanning, and select what's going to trigger your scans in the event that you do want to scan more frequently. If you're doing more frequent releases than daily, being able to leverage that and provide that. We've got customers that are saying, oh yeah, maybe that's something that we'll get to in a quarter or in a year, and we're saying, well, why don't you just turn on? Because you can just do that now, right? And you could get much more secure now. And again, that's where we say you really got to give those force multiplying tools to your teams in order to catch up and then to keep up, with the evolving threat landscape. Because again, there's this question of like, oh, that seems like a ton of investment. Well, when you implement a tool like Acunetics, you're making that investment. It automatically gives you the ability to stay up to date and to do daily scanning, which you may not need, but most of our customers are surprised when they actually go in and discover the pace at which there are config changes, the pace at which there are new builds and new releases. It's a lot faster than a lot of people are really thinking about it on a daily basis.
Yeah, I mean, that visibility is so important because it ties to your second point, which is if I'm going to use security as a differentiator, as a competitive advantage, I have to be able to show the results. The previous segment, Ala and I were talking about third party and improve it, right? I mean, you got to think about the ability to have the visibility, a plan to attack it, but then you're going to have to show proof. If you're going to use security as a competitive differentiator, you better have the results to show it. Otherwise, the second part of what you just described is not going to happen.
That's right, and that's where we've invested quite a bit in terms of our reporting capabilities, and really where Acunetics is one of the market leaders in that regard. I would like to say the market leader, but I try to be properly modest. It's we've got just a tremendous amount of reporting that's available to meet very specific needs of different industry segments, different verticals, and also just very executive friendly reports. And one of the things that we consistently hear back from customers and get a lot of positive feedback about when we conduct NPS surveys and other interviews with our customers to understand what's working and what's not, is just how valuable they find those executive level reports, not just with their own executives, but also, again, when they're using security as a source of competitive advantage, when they're in a contentious deal cycle, when they're going through a procurement review, and to be able to say, okay, well, this is what this is the executive summary report put together by our AppSec tool, and here's our kind of clean bill of health, in that regard, and that has really gone a long way and had a big impact on those procurement cycles in terms of shortening them, and again, increasing their odds of winning the deal against their competitors who may not have similar tooling or similar reports available.
Yeah, I mean, all important components. You can't say you do it. You got to prove that you can do it. If you can leverage automation to do it and put yourself in an advantage to win, then the mid-size, even the large enterprises, everybody wins at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And again, it's remarkable how quickly and how thoroughly the world changed post SolarWinds, and how much that is driving just a level of scrutiny again that we've never seen before. And this is true, what our customers expect us to deliver, but also what our customers are delivering to their customers and to the enterprises that they serve. And so, really being able to get ahead of that and being prepared, we hear time and time again is such a source of advantage. It helps, speed up deal cycles. And again, we've had a lot of CISOs who said, like, I never thought, the chief revenue officer would be a big fan of mine. But thanks to you guys, we're helping them, accelerate sales cycles, and that's earning me credibility and it's earning me budget, that I just don't know how I'd be able to get to elsewhere, otherwise.
Yeah, that's great. Mark, thank you so much for joining us on Security Weekly.
No, really enjoyed it, Matt. Thanks so much.
If anybody wants to learn more, please visit securityweekly.com/Acunetics. That's the end of our micro interviews, but stay tuned. Enterprise Security Weekly is coming up this evening. Welcome back to RSA Conference 2021, live from Virtual Broadcast Alley. I am your host, Matt Alderman. Joining me for the segment is Wayne Haber. He is Director of Engineering at GitLab. Wayne, welcome to Security Weekly.
Hey, Matt, how are you?
Very good. You want to talk about transparency, and I think we're going to talk about transparency in a couple ways here. One is company transparency, but I'm also interested about, transparency internally for organizations as well, because as we see with DevOps and security and DevSecOps, transparency, collaboration, all important aspects of making sure we have secure coding practices in place. Let's start with some of the transparency that GitLab has been doing in your corporate life.
Sure. So I was at a security company for quite a while before I came to GitLab about 2 years ago. And initially, I was shocked at the level of transparency. I knew that going in, but then living it is very different. We are transparent internally about most things that most companies would not be, and also externally. So we have, it's an open source product. It's also so that we have a lot of transparency around that, but also our company handbook and how we operate is completely open on the internet. We not only let anybody contribute to it in order to improve it, with approvers, of course, but also we encourage that from the public as well, which is great. So you can see how we process security incidents, how we test our own code for security. The company org chart is there, and that transparency really makes us extremely efficient and effective as a company. And it's also really, really inclusive, so everybody really can contribute. And there are a couple of challenges with it, occasionally, but the benefits far outweigh the negatives.
Well, I mean, we know the challenges in the space after supply chain attacks in the market, right? And what I think is interesting is when you take a very transparent approach, hopefully your software is not in the news because everybody knows exactly how you're handling security, kind of what your policies around security and privacy are, and all the things that maybe a commercial company doesn't do or may not do. It's, I think, a breath of fresh air when we think about that, knowing all the things that we've been, uncovering over the past few months.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll give an example of how we're different in terms of how we use our own things and how we operate. So if we use bug bounty programs. I think we use HackerOne, for example, and we're not the top payer on bug bounties on HackerOne, but pretty close to the top. I believe in the top 10. So we really want to get people's feedback, and we give them access to the code. We let them scan our hosted solutions, et cetera. And then when security issues are found, when we use our own security solutions, which we dog food ourselves, we use our own software for security to protect our own stuff. The same things that we give to customers, like security scanning of the code, secret scanning, container scanning, et cetera. Once the issue is found, whether it's by us or by the bug bounty program or pen testers that we hire, we document it internally. Anybody at the company can see the security issues we're working on. And that brings so much collaboration and feedback, and making sure that it speeds the time to resolve the issues, and it also increases the level of surety that we've actually solved it and things like it. Very different than what I was used to at previous companies, and we do a great job of that. And then once that security issue is resolved, and we tell customers about it, so they can patch if they need to, if they're running our self-hosted version, we then often make the details public. So all of our discussions about the issue, all of our pull requests or merge requests in GitLab terminology, on the changes, and we get feedback. Sometimes we didn't fix things completely, and we get feedback from the community so we can fully fix them and really understand it. And it's the level of collaboration and the level of inclusiveness to get a lot of people's feedback really improves things, and it's just refreshing.
Yeah, and I think as people really try to figure out how to solve supply chain risk, having transparency from people that are actually in their supply chain. Because if you think about what GitLab does, right? People are using your CI/CD pipeline technologies to build their software to put into their applications into the cloud, deploy wherever. And when you think about that for a second, I mean, you are a critical part of that supply chain. And when we think about security, sometimes we don't think about securing the CI/CD process. I mean, Paul and I talk about this all the time because, we have our own pipeline process and we need to secure it better. But if somebody like GitLab is really on top of securing it and making it transparent to you, that takes a little pressure off of aspects, maybe not everything, but a good chunk of aspects about how do you secure that supply chain.
Yeah, and we use our own solutions that we make part of our commercial product to secure our own. And so I was a customer of GitLab before I worked at GitLab, and I saw how well it worked. Because at the previous company I was at, and it's very common, is you have spot solutions. You have a solution for scanning the code with SAS. You have a solution for doing web app scanning. You have a solution for dependency checking, for secret scanning, which is separate, et cetera. And the developers hate those things when they're separate, in my opinion. And because they got to go into something else, there's something else to implement, there's something else to keep track of. So since we have really good solutions that do the whole DevOps lifecycle, from a developer's perspective, we put those security issues right in front of the developers at the time they can resolve them.
Right.
They can then submit a merge request to see a build run and see if it actually resolved it, and verify it. So it puts it right there in the same tool the developers use, which the developers really like, which is great to get adoption. Because often when you have spot solutions for each individual part, the developers won't use them, and it's the security team or the CISO team chasing after the development teams rather than having a real partnership there to.
Yeah, and I mean, if we think about internal transparency, the ability to integrate security into the pipeline and making that visible, transparent, like instantly available to the developers is what the whole concept of shift left is about, right? I mean, it's the ability for, as you're moving through the pipeline and you're doing builds and you're scanning them and you're looking for your dependencies and all the fun things that happen in that pipeline, making it actionable, like at the time you discover it. That's improving the overall security of the application. And to your point, we've seen a lot of transformation in the application security space, right? Where the security players finally realized that they had to bring the tools to the developers, that the developers weren't going to log into the tools. And so by you guys having a lot of those integrated already into the pipeline, you make it a lot easier to manage the end-to-end process.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I've seen it work where I worked previously, and I see it work for ourselves as well. And we get a lot of great feedback from our customers that they integrate that. And of course, customers don't need to make their security issues internally transparent in order to use our solutions. That's something we do ourselves, but yeah. I think it really helps. Since we're also we operate in 67 countries and 1,300 employees and 0 offices, which we've done that since the beginning. All that collaboration being asynchronous, so often in writing, we often record our meetings very, very often, and often they'll have that on YouTube by intent publicly, so people can see how we operate. They can see how we do things. We get feedback that way. We get a lot of trust with our customers, with our community of open source contributors. We also, one thing I didn't realize is it actually ends up being a recruiting tool. People have told me, Wayne, I joined your team because I was able to watch your staff meeting for the last 2 staff meetings on YouTube and just see what the people are like and see what you like. And, that's great.
I think this is a great learning lesson for how to build a really good security culture, especially between development and security. It's a struggle still for a lot of organizations. The security teams looked at the team of no, you can't do that, or the team that's going to slow down development or deployment because they've got to go run all their checks over here. But when you can bring that in to the development cycle, think about the culture you're creating in those organizations where development and security see the exact same things in the exact same places, and you're not slowing down the development pipeline. That's a huge advantage and creates a really good culture that organizations struggle with. So I think this is a really good roadmap for others to think about if they really want to build true security culture in their organizations.
Absolutely agree. And you're talking about the culture of no, or that's often how the security teams and CISO teams are seen as an impediment to progress. And completely integrating the process really helps with that. It also helps to, if an organization is not transparent internally and doesn't have these things integrated, is to start small and iteratively implement it. Perhaps make security issues that are low risk available internally at the company to get more feedback on them and more collaboration on them. Show the value, show how they're resolved faster, and then slowly increase the risk levels if an organization is not already doing that, in order to show the value on time to resolve and the value in the completeness of the solution. Because it's one thing to theoretically consider those things and think about them, but I've really seen it happen where we use our own tools to do
That's
that.
great. Yeah, there's one other angle I wanted to touch on just briefly. There have been a lot of, outside of the main supply chain attack, which is in the news, we've also seen some very interesting research being done on open source projects, right? Where we've got a lot of vulnerabilities that have been sitting in legacy open source products for a while, and there are dependencies in other operating systems or whatever. I want to, you guys spend a lot of time, I think, having your code tested and making that available. And I think that's another really interesting part, because when we look at some of these older open source components that have a lot of technical debt because they have a lot of history, or they don't have a lot of contributors to them, and therefore they can't continue to stay on top of the security aspects, it creates a lot of vulnerabilities later. I think you guys have also done a really good job from this perspective, being really transparent, having the contributors and making the changes to continually improve and secure your open source project, which we don't necessarily see in other open source projects.
Yeah, it's a great point. And we use dependency checking. We've automated dependency checking to look at that part of the supply chain. We can also scan containers for missing patches and misconfigurations, et cetera. And we use that ourselves as well as part of the product. And it really does help to automate that, to scan for those. And then it also can help to, as you're automating these, to make, as you said, to make it transparent, but also taking feedback from the community. So an example is one of my teams developed a new feature, one of my engineering teams, and it was a new developer, and they introduced a security bug. It was a stored cross-site scripting bug. It was hard to exploit, but it was definitely still there. And we missed it, our scanning missed it, but our bug bounty program, somebody caught it. And we thanked them for it. We paid them a bounty. We fixed it pretty quickly. We told our customers about it. And then we learned from it. We were iteratively improving, saying, hey, we use this kind of field in the Ruby code rather than that kind of field that did the validation. So let's scan all our other code and let's train the team, especially the new developers, to handle that. And it was a great experience for both us and I think also for the bug bounty person.
Yeah, and I think that's a great lesson learned, because you learned from the bug bounty. You updated your testing process to go not only validate that fix, but then run that against all my other code, all my other legacy code that's already been out there, and make sure that that vulnerability doesn't exist anywhere else, right? And that's a testament to how open source security should really run at the end of the day, is that continual feedback, that continual testing improvement to make the source code that much more secure.
Absolutely. And the other key part is to make the root cause analysis, the RCAs, whether it's outages or security issues, blameless. Don't blame the people. Make it safe for the people who are involved to contribute and discuss. It's blame the processes and the technologies are in place so it can be improved. And we do a lot of that as well. And that really, really helps. It's very inclusive and it really helps to improve things overall.
Yeah, and that's a great that's a great leadership lesson, right? Because if it's the blame game, guess what? The next guy or gal is not going to speak up and get that issue fixed. And when the leadership believes in that transparency and that inclusiveness and doesn't blame people for things, but has a process that allows you to fix it quickly and improve from that, that's a great way to think about security.
Absolutely, I agree.
Yeah. Wayne, thank you so much for joining us on Security Weekly.
Thanks, Matt. Have a great day.
If anybody wants to learn more, please visit securityweekly.com/GitLab. And with that, we're going to take a quick break, but don't worry, we'll be back with more micro interviews today.